Well, I'd first say that the causal argument doesn't talk about the microscopic world at all. It talks about the macroscopic world. Secondly, I'm not a physicist, so I have no authority on the subject whatsoever, but Einstein makes a lot of sense to me when he criticizes Heisenberg and says that that's got to be an epistemological limitation, not an ontological limitation. You cannot imagine something really having no determinate position or velocity once it's observed. If the act of observation, due to the finite speed of light, interferes physically with the object, it can be understood. But the mere consciousness of an object cannot possibly change the object, because then it's not the object of which you're conscious. It's a different one. So I think there's a logical self-contradiction built into that version of Heisenberg's principle. But I'm not sure whether that was Heisenberg's version. Ask John Polkinghorne.
Thank you very much.
Hi. You pointed out that New Agers are so deluded because they think they're God rather than admitting that we all yearn for God. And also pointed out that the central tenet of Christianity is that God came down to be one of us. But philosophically speaking, why is it okay for God to be man and not okay for man to be God?
Oh, I see who you are now. You are the Sibylline oracle. You are the inscription over the temple of Apollo, Gnothes Auton. Yes, a very good question. Not only is it not permitted for us to be God, but it is commanded for us to be God. The Eastern Orthodox call this theosis. It is our destiny. God will share his very life with us. We will become part of the family. The thing that I criticize in the New Age movement is not their ideal of a meeting of the divine and the human, but the means. Their means are human rather than divine. They don't depend upon divine grace. They depend on human effort.
Okay. Thank you.
Almost all of your arguments, they are based on the assumption that if there is a God, he is always a creator. What about a God who is not a creator?
How interesting. How old are you? That's a pagan idea. Am I speaking to an ancient Greek now? Frankly, I've never given that much of a thought. That's the first time anybody has ever asked me that question. If you mean a god like Zeus or Apollo or Poseidon or someone like that. Or if you mean God as some vague principle, like goodness, truth, and beauty, I wouldn't call that God. I'd call that an idea.
Thanks. I guess there's one particular argument about your argument from a desire which we never find completed, and I probably misunderstood the argument, but one objection would be that we do experience desires for all kinds of things which we find partially completed, but my desire for food is always greater than I should and often can actually satisfy. And other desires, such as for sex or for all kinds of pleasures, we actually can't satisfy completely or to the extent that we would like to. So we experience a lot of natural desires which are actually unable to be satisfied. So why should another one for happiness, for example, lead us to think that there is some further happiness which it does exist?
With the possible exception of sexual desire, and maybe the desire of the surfer for the perfect wave, I think every other desire can be satisfied temporarily. After you've had a delicious meal, you don't want to eat more at that time. Your hunger is not there anymore. It'll be there in 6 hours, but it's not there now. Sexual desire is different in that there's an ecstasy, a standing outside the self that's involved there that's not present in ordinary desires, like for food or even for human society. So there's something much more mystical about that, which probably accounts for the fact that that desire is vastly in exceed of the demand is in exceed of the supply. As C.S. Lewis puts it, if everybody ate as much as they want, the world could still supply all the food. But if everybody had as much sex as they want, every male would populate an entire village. So, what we want, I think, in sexual desire, and maybe in a few others, is that of which sex is an icon. What I'm looking for in looking for the perfect wave as a very poor but fanatical surfer is really God. I want to surf on God. And even if I find the perfect wave, I say that's just an icon.
Hi. If from your arguments I take the premise that God exists, and I heard you use the term sinners earlier.
That's not my premise, that's my conclusion.
Okay, your conclusion that sinners, so therefore we're less than perfect.
Yeah.
How do you have perfection and imperfection coexist? Because once imperfection touches perfection, then we have imperfection.
It can't. That's the deepest answer to why good people suffer. Because the sculptor has to perfect his statue, and we're far from perfect. So we need a lot of cooking.
How you doing? I am a strong proponent of positivity in terms of the here and now, what is to be and what was. I've often found myself telling people that this life we live is predetermined, which means I do believe in God. I believe that there's a God that does exist, and he orchestrates our lives. Everything that we do, everything that we say, this conversation I'm having with you right now was all predetermined. When you spoke earlier about infinite time, I'm trying to understand what it is that, or who it is, we all as people assume that it's God, that there is a higher being, that there's somebody that's orchestrating our lives, that is somebody that we find faith in, that we pray to, that we believe in, that can solve all our ills. When I find myself posed with the question from other people about where, who, what, when, why things are done, I always find myself saying, everything that we do, everything that we are, everything that we become was already predetermined. Our life here was predetermined the day we were born, but we do not know when that day.
So I believe that too. What question emerges from that?
My question is, the fact that you posed a question about whether or not God exists, the gentleman before me just confirmed that you do believe in God, like myself. How can we, or should we believe that God in itself is a person, can be visible? You understand what I'm saying? Maybe I'm not wording it right. Okay. Tough one. Huh?
Some of the arguments for the existence of God just prove that there's some sort of creator.
Okay.
Others, like the moral argument, or an argument I didn't give you, the argument from consciousness, the analogy of the brain as a computer is close to that, I think prove that God is not just a force, but a person with a mind and a will. Because design requires a mind, and a moral law requires a will. Then the next question is, has this God, who is perfect and all-powerful and a mind and a will, has this God ever intervened, made himself visible, come into our world, done miracles? In order to answer that question, you have to look at history and the historical evidence.
If I may. The one other question I have is the belief in the Bible, which was supposedly written before there was a formidable language. And it chronicles things from thousands of years ago that we're experiencing today. Now, the fact that there is supposedly, and I believe there is, a God who wrote this book anticipatory of the things that we're going through now, can you give me some sort of...
Oh, yes. The Bible is one of the biggest pieces of historical evidence. There's no book like it. The fulfilled prophecies, the total lack of historical contradictions. It's an amazing book. Looked at by the same standards as you look at any other books, it'll stand out as unique.
Thank you.
Dr. Kreeft, given the logical consistency of your arguments, your presentation, there's one thing that I probably didn't understand, and I just need some clarification. You said that if any of us answered yes to the question of wanting to meet God in the next 2 minutes, if that were an option, we would have to be either, I think you said, a very great saint or a great fool.
Or a great fool, yeah.
Yet, since God is love, And